Good evening. I'm Larry Snyder, and on behalf of the Potter College of Arts and Letters and the School of Media, I would like to welcome all of you tonight to the 4th Annual Fleischaker Greene Award for Courageous International Reporting. In 2008, Louisville attorneys John Fleischaker and Kim Greene created the Fleischaker Greene Fund for Excellence in First Amendment Issues at WKU. The fund also supports WKU's Fleischaker Greene Scholars in First Amendment Studies program, which gives top students in the School of Media the opportunity to take advantage of special topics class and brings nationally recognized speakers in journalism and First Amendment issues to the WKU campus. I would like to, John couldn't be here tonight, but I would like to recognize Kim. If you wouldn't mind, stand and let us thank you properly. John and Kim have been marvelous friends of the school, marvelous patrons of the university, and supporters of First Amendment rights and the importance of journalism. And quite frankly, I don't think there's ever been a more important time in the history of our nation than it is right now to talk about these issues. And that is particularly relevant with tonight's speaker. And here to introduce her tonight is Luke Langton. Dr. Langton is the Turner Professor of Journalism here at the School of Media, and he will introduce our speaker for tonight. Thank you all for being here.
I'd like to echo Larry's comment on Kim and thanking her. And John is going to get a video package of this, so John, hello to you too, and thank you. They truly, and I'm going to put a plug in, their course that's being offered next semester is really, in my mind, and I'm sorry if I offend any other faculty members, but it is the premier course of our school in that it brings together all of the skills that students learn here and gives a sense of entrepreneurship and really digging into issues that are pertinent to today. That's the whole purpose of this course, looking at the same thing that our guest is going to talk about tonight in a sense of freedom of speech and freedom of information. So I urge you to look it up. It's offered next semester, but it's offered once a year. So if you don't make it this year, get into it this year, then please look for it in the coming years as well. So I just have a couple of things written, and I'm just going to read it because it's easier for me. As often happens, we may be doing things in life that upon first glance seem to have no connection to one another. But when we explore them further, we realize that by some coincidence, they're intrinsically related. I'm currently reading a historical book titled The British Are Coming. We all know the heroic exploits of Paul Revere and William Dawes on the night of April 1775, when they rode their horses across the countryside to alarm their fellow patriots of the approaching British forces. Our guest and Fleischaker Greene awardee Jessikka has likewise been sounding an alarm that presages another kind of threat, not only to the U.S., but to the entire international community. And like Revere and Dawes, she broadcasts this threat at her own peril. I don't know exactly which stories she'll share with you tonight because Russia's overall attack strategy is complex and its tentacles are widespread. But I think that if you listen closely, you'll realize that we are facing great peril today. After making a presentation in one of my classes yesterday, one of the students asked her, "Why do you put yourself in such a vulnerable position?" Her answer was perfect and delivered in her straightforward Finnish style of communicating. "I'm a journalist, and that's what journalists do." That is the perfect statement for this particular award, and she's a perfect recipient for this award. So ladies and gentlemen, Jessikka Aro.
Hi, and thank you so much for the really moving words. They really mean a lot, like all support mean to me a lot, and that's also the reason why I continue, because I hear this good feedback. And also, thank you for having me here. Thank you for awarding me. It's an honor. And also, it has been so great meeting all these brilliant students and discussing the most important things with you. But yes, I will go directly into the topic. I will discuss what I have found in my investigations, which I started back in 2014. And I will also tell another story. I will tell what happened to myself and how my life changed after I started to investigate this story. So the story was and still is about Russian trolls and their international impact in real people. So in 2014, I learned that not so far from Helsinki, where I lived, the capital of Finland, a very peaceful Nordic country, there is a factory, an office of 4 stories high office where there are young adults being paid to produce pro-Putin and pro-Russia propaganda, but they pretend as normal citizens who are just voicing out their opinions. So what they did was, and what they still do, is that they build fake profiles on social media and then fill the social media sphere with propaganda and lies, and they get paid for it. Also, I had learned about this Russian troll factory from really brave Russian journalists who already back in 2013 had infiltrated the troll factory, worked there covertly, and then they published everything in Novaya Gazeta, a critical newspaper, one of the last bastions of freedom of speech in autocratic Russia. And I wanted to know, how do these social media propagandists, can they really impact, can they really manipulate real people across borders? Because we also have Russian speakers and Russian population in Finland, and I thought they were in a specifically vulnerable place. And I also wanted to know, what are these so-called trolls up to? Because there was not much information. Also, during these times, Russia was waging its hybrid warfare against Ukraine, its neighboring country, and there was a lot of propaganda about what's really going on in Crimean Peninsula and also in eastern Ukraine. And I wanted to know what's going on and how does this really impact. So I used the method of crowdsourcing. And the crowdsourcing method is that you ask the audience to help you investigate. I knew that this was such a big topic that I couldn't do it alone, and then I asked Finnish people, please let me know, where have you seen anonymous or fake profiles which are spreading aggressively Russian propaganda, and in which channels, and specifically how have you reacted to them? Because I wanted to know, is this just some Russian lame joke which doesn't have influence in anything, or is it something more serious? I was afraid it might be something more serious. So I was immediately made target of Russian fake news campaign. In these filth stories, which were immediately published in Russian fake news sites, I'm being framed as a famous assistant of NATO and Baltic and American security services. Also, these stories claim that I am working in close cooperation with NATO and that I am compiling an illegal database of Putin's supporters in Finland and also giving that to someone in the United States. So basically I was being framed as an agent. Also, that's very old-fashioned Soviet Union type of trick that is still today in modern Russia played against opposition figures as well as human rights organizations. For example, Amnesty International is framed as foreign agent and kicked away from Russia. Then the biggest problem with these stories was, and still is, of course, that they were not true, but they were also presenting my contact information, my phone number, as well as my email address. So my communications devices were quickly filled with Russian language threats, Russian language wishes for me to go to jail, and I even received phone calls from Ukrainian number where there are also Russian speakers who had been reading these stories and believed that they're true and acted upon it. And in these phone calls, for example, there was the sound of a shooting gun. Also, phone calls came from Kazakhstan and Russia and everywhere. And I realized what I actually knew was true, but this only made it more clear in my personal case why digital disinformation is such a grave threat to not just me personally, but also to whole nation states, because it is used to agitate real people with real emotions to hateful actions. So people's feelings are being manipulated with disinformation, and they are being mobilized into hateful actions. Also, disinformation is being used to dehumanize and demonize whole populations. So here, where did this disinformation and basically libels and lies, where did they come from? This is a place called Russian Institute of Strategic Studies. This is an organization that is operating in Kremlin and in Moscow in Russia, and they serve as Putin's think tank. So what they do is they provide information to back up Putin's regime decision making, but also what they do is that they serve as the PR office of Russian security services. And in addition, their supervisors are appointed by President Putin himself, and they are security service officers. So this guy who put out this filth disinformation about myself and my work, he is actually Finnish citizen. This is also one method of Russian and Kremlin's information warfare. They use these proxy operators who seemingly have no ties to the Kremlin. So this guy is Finnish citizen called Johan Beckman, and he works in RIS, in this Russian Institute of Strategic Studies, and he is international influence agent of the Kremlin. You can see him, for example, shaking hands with Russia's ally dictator Bashar al-Assad of Syria. Then you can see him being escorted away in Moldova by the Moldovan police because he was there also waging pro-Russian protests, and also he's waging some kind of machine gun inside Syria, where he visits with other Russian spies on trips. So this is the type of person, and often also used by Russian state propaganda medias to spread Kremlin's messages, pretending as if he is just, a well-informed academic, but he's basically fake expert and propagandist. So here, just some of the so-called feedback that I started to receive. Some of it translated with Google very poorly from Russian to English, some of it already outdated information-wise. So basically I was being smeared as, and also Finland as a nation was being smeared, and it was told to me that Finnish government is fascist because it's American puppet state and all this very untruthful and disgusting smears. And none of these people who were sending me this had been reading my original stories. They had only been reading disinformation about me. Here also one example of the materials that was being sent to me. It says here Finnish fascism in Russian, and it has got the Finnish country flag smeared with Nazi and fascist symbols, and it kind of has like these kind of Finnish-looking people also in it to add credibility. And when I received this, I became really worried again because I realized that such material either already exists or that it's really quickly being produced, and such material had been spread about the country and nation of Ukraine already years before Russia started its kinetic and physical warfare against Ukraine. So Ukraine was being smeared with the craft of propaganda, very basic craft of propaganda, as Nazi and fascist state, which needs to be liberated by the Russian armed forces. And then some soldiers recruited to Russian army and later gave disappointed interviews because when they finally got to wage war in Ukraine, there were no fascists or Nazis to be seen, but they had been propagated by their state-sponsored medias that Nazis are everywhere. So then, also another front was opened against me. This is harassment and trolling and crime group on Facebook called Russian Troll Army. So it's actually just one group in a chain of other similar groups internationally. But this specific group was specifically founded to attack my investigation, and it serves as the platform of psychological operations. It was first founded by these professional propagandists who work for the Kremlin and fake profiles. And then they started gathering just everyday Facebook users to the group and started propagating them to believe that everything they said is true, and also fantasizing about my death, fantasizing about slitting my stomach open, fantasizing about putting a bomb on my newsroom. And this is not legal in Finland. I have to tell you that this is considered as illegal threat in the Finnish legislation, and still they would let people have the false idea that this is normal use of freedom of speech. And whenever someone opposes in this group, the administrators, he is being kicked away. And so yes, also they organize all kinds of operations. And the interesting thing is that this was 2014, and 2.5 years later, after they started to investigate the Russian interference in the US elections, 2016 presidential elections, they found similar groups also here in amongst the American citizens. So Russian trolls being infiltrating US communities using Facebook as a tool. But this same was happening already 2014 in Finland. And yes, they also make these filthy memes and spread Russian propaganda. And also they crowd stalk, so use big crowds of anonymous profiles and real people to send filth to my own colleagues within the Finnish broadcasting company. And this is also one method of Russian information operations. They pick their targets and want to marginalize them in not just the public sphere by framing everyone who talks about Russian information operations as, for example, Russophobe or conspiracy theorist, but they also want to marginalize the targets within their professional communities. So after now for over 5 years of harassment, some of my own journalist colleagues in Finland think that I am crazy and my Russia stories are not to be believed, because that message has been just propagated into their mind and they believe it. So then, as part of my investigation, I also went to the Russian troll factory. This was February 2015. At that time, no Western film crew had gone there and really dug it inside out. At this time, we wanted to really find out everything, what's going on. And so we were there for 3 days, and we found out that the place was recruiting people. And it was not calling itself as Troll Factory. Instead, it was Internet Research Agency. And they were recruiting copywriters and graphic designers to work in 12-hour shifts, also during nighttime, and also in English language. So we called to the recruiter, and we pretended we want a job there. And we asked, what kind of content do you want me to produce if I come to work there? And they said, political, and also news online. So, okay, already 2015 February there was an international operation ongoing. They told it themselves. Then also they have, or at least that time had, very poorly operating security guard, because until these days there were only rumors that this is run by the Russian security services, the FSB or such, or maybe the military intelligence, GRU. But when we were filming and taking photos outside the entrance, the security guard came out, and I was still filming, and he started yelling to us that we need to leave, or else he will call the police, because can't we see that this is an administrative building? Well, in Russia, administrative buildings are always somehow government connected and specially protected by presidential decree in the Russian legislation, and they are always police stations or nuclear power plants or military bases. So thank you, security guard, for telling us state security secrets. Now I will also show you, it was really impossible to receive any interviews from the former troll workers, but we managed to speak with these brave journalists who had infiltrated it previously, and we forcefully you cannot call what you're going to see an interview, but we discussed, let's just say we discussed with one of the guys who came out from the factory. And before I show you the 2-minute film, I will tell you also that in this factory there was and still is also a fake news agency operating. In this fake news agency they produce news which they claim come from Ukraine when in fact they come from St. Petersburg. So some of these people describe themselves as journalists. So this is what happened. I will also tell as background that this guy's voice has been altered so that he won't get into any trouble, and also it has been like fogged to also not identify him.
Я думаю, что я обладаю полномочиями отвечать на какие-то вопросы. Я журналист, если меня спросят про работу, я с удовольствием. Ну, вы журналист, а мы другая работа, журналист, я, к сожалению. Ну, у меня свои есть обязанности. Я, к сожалению, могу ничего сказать. Ну, хотя бы скажите, если вы не журналист, то еще есть в ответственной власти. Есть журналисты, вы можете их подкараулить. Ну, к сожалению, у вас журналист почему-то боятся разговаривать. Вам запрещено говорить о своей работе? Нет, почему? Ну, я просто не очень люблю на телеэкране, когда ты просто не люблю, когда меня снимают. Конечно, не снимаю, хотя бы. Нет, ну все равно, я не люблю очень разговаривать на такие откровенные темы. Никаких откровенных тем, господи, просто про вашу работу. Ну, я не очень хочу разговаривать про свою работу. Хорошо, можете рассказать, о чем пишет ваша история? Я должен, это разговор о работе. А что, содержание, ваш контент, это тоже государственная тайна? Ну, при чем здесь государственная тайна? Ну, что вы не хотите об этом говорить? Ну, просто я не хочу об этом говорить. Вы можете, сейчас как раз смена начинается новая, вы сможете сейчас встретить кого-то, вы можете быть вообще. К сожалению, почему никто не хочет рассказывать о себе? Ну, я, к сожалению. Вы можете начать, можете дождаться. Вам тоже потребуется. С вашим начальством вчера разговаривали тоже. Я, к сожалению, не могу вам ничего сказать. Я, скажем так, сам ничего не знаю. Почему у вас на здании такого познавательного знака? Что же за организация? Я не знаю, но это же не ко мне вопрос, эти вопросы, скорее всего, начальство. Я обычно недоволен рабочим. А внутри там есть какие-то обозначения организации? Не знаю. Выходной обычно бывает там. Ну, там есть вход в здание через по карточкам, все. А какого-то списка организаций, там, туда звоните так-то, туда звоните так-то? Я не знаю. Нет такой информации. Если бы знал, сказал бы. Как не имеете информацию? Висит или нет список? Я не знаю, я не видел. Спасибо. Спасибо за информацию. Всего доброго, до свидания. Спасибо.
So yeah, it was like this with everyone there, and it appeared, and it was so that these people had been forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So if they would have disclosed anything to us, they would have been forced to pay a big fine. So again, after when we came back from Russia and we made our stories also in English language, and they were really widely cited and quoted even in American media, we were being framed then in fake news media and in troll groups as liars and propagandists and prostitutes and Russia haters. And then also interesting things happened against Yle, my employee, the broadcasting company. They used, some anonymous activists use the Facebook event feature in which you can normally, for example, organize birthday parties and invite people to, I don't know, housewarming parties or other types of nice events. But here they organized protest against Yle Troll Factory. and they portrayed everything upside down, that Yle was the propaganda spreader, the Finnish Yle where I work, and that the Russian Troll Factory, that was the proper news agency. They also threatened to film everyone who comes in and out from the Yle Troll Factory, and also they demanded that the whole place should be shut down. And this also then caused security concern because some of our journalists were actually afraid. And after this, there has been a variety of similar protests against my employer, and often these people also shout my name there, so they want to specifically target me. But interesting thing again, how this relates to US and many other places, in the Mueller investigations about the Russian interference, they found later, 2 years after this, that Russian trolls used these Facebook events to create, for example, protests against immigrants and pro-immigrants in the same street here in the United States. And also they organized pro-Trump protests and pretending to be just regular Americans. Here, someone pretended to be my father, who at this point had been dead for 20 years. So it appeared that someone was looking into my private life really heavily, because my father was not public figure, his name was not in public domain, but it was used to psychologically harass me. I gave this to the police. They didn't find who did send this horrible message to me. But here I realized that this doesn't have any limitations whatsoever. But then about my findings, I started publishing my findings of how the social media propaganda trolls have been able to control Finnish public debates and political climate in May 2015. And again, I made these stories in Finnish, in Russian, and in English, because these results are applicable internationally in Western countries. So the Russian trolls had managed to actually manipulate people into silence. So shut down critical commenting in Finland about Russia issues. So whenever, just give you an example, whenever a private person who was on Twitter or on Facebook or on normal media's comment section would voice out opinion or even information about Kremlin's activities, trolls would attack, start threatening with death or start to mold his messages, and they would become scared and just leave all discussions. Some even told me they had left social media completely. Then some Finns had lost the idea of what is not true and what is true, for example, in the situation in Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, because there was so much troll and propaganda stories. And some people also, there is a group of people who also are so welcoming to outside influence that they become propagandists themselves after they are being subjected to the propaganda first. So they share on Facebook and on Twitter and in other channels these propaganda messages further. But also good news was that some Finns were not influenced in any way, and many noticed in Finland, because we are Russia's neighbor and we know what they're up to, they noticed that this is the same Soviet stuff which always existed, but now it's in new digital form. But yeah, and also I listed platforms and sites which were troll and propaganda infested. Also, some high-profile parliament officials are participating in trolling groups and harassing me also. One source of Russian trolling on social media is the Russian embassy social media accounts on Facebook and Twitter. I list very many examples of how they had attacked both Finland and also Ukraine and Finnish journalists, and simultaneously, for example, retweeted troll accounts propaganda. And then after my investigations, Russian embassies here and there have engaged into similar trolling harassment operations in different countries. Okay, so harassment against me went on. Some activists also made filth song, in which I was once again being framed as mentally ill and someone who only invented Russian trolls from my own imagination. And they made also YouTube video about it and had someone, communist freelance actress, playing me in some really horrible outfit. And also they portray portray me as some kind of pro-USA propagandist, as if that would be horrible stuff, being pro-USA and also some pro-NATO, because Finland is not member of NATO and Russia wants to do everything it can to prevent that from happening. So that makes me evidently pro-NATO extremist. And also here in the up right screen capture, you can see Venäjän trolliarmeijan laulu- soitinyhtiö. It's a group or site on Facebook, and it says sponsored, which means that some activists have paid money to Facebook so that this advertisement of filth about me will be shown to an even more massive audience. This was 2016 in Finland. A year later, started the investigation in United States, where they found that Troll Factory advertisement had been spread to 126 million Americans like this, using also this sponsored advertisement content. So one of the sites that I listed in my troll investigations as propaganda sites was a site called, sorry my language, What the Fuck Paper. It's MV-lehti in Finnish. It also publishes in Russian and in English, and they are like pro-Kremlin, pro-neo-Nazi and pro-far-right news site. They claim to tell the truth that the mainstream media is hiding, but when you look what they are actually spreading, it's Russian propaganda, it's conspiracy theories, it's smears. So this is what they did to me. They have until today published around 300 filth pieces, which I counted. They have 4.5 million clicks, and they smear me like this. This is just, majority of these were originally in Finnish, so these are the headlines of the filth stories. You can see what the content is. So this is actually legal in Finland. So this is like libels and defamation. And also one problem is that they also attack people who support me publicly, so that no one would support me. Also, I'm being followed in Helsinki, and hate YouTube videos are being spread about me, and hate Vimeo videos as well. Here I'm also being attacked by Russia Today German language. It's interesting because then I received German language Russian trolling to my Twitter. Also nice memes, or not so nice, are being spread. These spread really nicely like wildfire. Also memes are being spread by the Troll Factory about Hillary Clinton being crooked and belonging to jail, and so this meme thing is also one of their favorite things. Also I'm being subjected to fake criminal complaints, me and my chief editor. Here also outside cyberspace there are happenings. Police found in their investigations back in 2016 that there was actually someone inside, or one named person inside my broadcasting company, so my colleague, who was giving out information to this guy who works for the Kremlin, information about my job assignments, and also texting about our Moscow correspondent and how her home had been attacked by security services, and they were making fun of it. So this guy doesn't work anymore with us. Here, sometimes these trolls, and the trolls' one goal is to put these conspiracy, horrible fake news stories into very wide circulation. And sometimes they also succeed. In Finland, they succeeded after 2 years of filth spreading on social media. They propelled these stories into proper so-called mainstream media. Here, just some to show quickly the dynamics. First, there is fake news story, and then there is reaction from either a real person or then some trolls who spread these fakes even further. So many people want to kill me, even my own friends, former friends, like real people who know me personally, have sent me death threats. Here, Finnish police, who have been investigating this case, they also become targets of hate campaigns. They also have to file police reports. Also, they attack Finnish officers of the defense forces. And also, they promote certain presidential candidates who are extremists and pro-Kremlin. And here, just to show quickly what kind of operations the trolls have done after my investigation, they have even according to American scientists, they have promoted anti-vaccine disinformation through Twitter. So Twitter trolls who originally were promoting Trump as a president later became anti-vaccination campaigners. But also they have attacked the Brexit, so Britain's exit from the European Union. They have pushed for the exit. They have attacked Catalonian independence. They have fueled conflicts here and there. And for example, at the moment, they're fueling the Yellow Vest protests in France. Here, very interesting troll account, influential here in the USA, called Jenna Abrams. So Jenna Abrams is invention of the troll factory. Very interesting social media persona, and quoted by many actual real medias as a real person. But then she was outed as Russian troll, so then that stopped, luckily. And here, just to show the Russian Institute of Strategic Studies, which I discussed in the beginning, which was the one who attacked me originally. Reuters news agency interviewed American security officials back in 2017 and found out that it was actually RIS who actually invented and designed the whole massive troll and fake news operation against the United States. So they had been like sharing blueprints and plans in Russian Duma for acceptance. And I will just end here about the physical consequences of how this hate spreading is actually having security consequences. I sued these people with my company, my media company, because they were also attacking my company. And these extremists started fueling people and agitating people to come and protest against me in my own trial against these Kremlin's perpetrators. And what happened was there were so many threats against me, death threats, as well as these extremists came there and took places away from traditional journalists who tried to report about the trial. So they came there and they made direct live YouTube fake filth videos smearing me and my witnesses from the hallways of the court, and also pushing traditional journalists and using mental violence against them. But then in the end, these harassers received really strict sentences, and now I'm actually in the middle of appeals court, and I have recently filed 120-page report to the police again because I have also been hacked. And but I then continue my work because of fantastic people like you, and yeah, this is now how it is, and thank you very much.
Questions? We have a couple of mics that are being distributed, so just wait for the mic to get to you.
Hello. As you may well know, in 2016, Poroshenko got a lot of criticism for banning Yandex and VKontakte locally, especially in America, where freedom of speech is talked about so often. Do you think the government is able to take any role in protecting its people from propaganda?
Yeah, and let me tell everyone who may not know who is Poroshenko. So he was former Ukrainian president, and he did just like you told, and he blocked access from Ukrainians to Russian services called WKontakte, which is one troll platform, and as well as Yandex, the Russian Google. First, to comment that, I think that was an excellent choice from a president who was leading a nation in defense war against Russia, and it's very understandable. Then about freedom of speech, what the government can do. Here in the United States, the freedom of speech is much wider than us in Europe. It works both ways, in good and bad. One of the problems is, and what government could fix, is that the companies that enable Russian propaganda, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube/Google, they are American companies and they operate internationally. They also operate in countries enabling Russian trolls and hate speech and propaganda, where propaganda is not allowed by freedom of speech and hate speech is not allowed. So governments should regulate these companies. Even Mark Zuckerberg has said himself just recently that they don't know what to do with this, foreign interference, but actually they do know, and they should do something about really quickly. So this is what I have been trying to advocate for, that they should be quickly regulated, because now the Russian trolls are regulating them, basically.
So Jessica, could
Yeah.
you tell people about, and I know this isn't your particular area, but I do know that you know about it, but the Rohingya people, and what free speech has done to a whole culture and a whole group of people.
Yeah, of course. So in Myanmar, so in Southeast Asia, there is this people, Muslim minority called Rohingya, and they have historically been oppressed by the majority population and also by the government, which is a dictatorship and military junta. And just a couple of years ago, hate was being mobilized against the Rohingya minority in a manner that, according to UN fact-finding mission, they were subjected to genocide. And how it was conducted was really disgusting, because there were Myanmar military officers basically trolling and filling Facebook with disgusting slurs, claiming that these Rohingyas are dogs and animals who need to be burned and villages need to be taken down, and Facebook did nothing. So this is now how it's being used, and it's really tricky in countries like Myanmar, in which actually Facebook has such a monopoly in internet business that people get internet in their homes, and Facebook is their how they use internet. So they get Facebook with their internet connection directly, and they think Facebook is internet. So, and actually I went to Silicon Valley and San Francisco with a member of Rohingya community, and Lenny Posner, whose child was killed in Sandy Hook school shooting 2012, and Lenny became target of social media smears and conspiracy theories that he's crisis actor and his child never existed. And then we also had this American kid who was not vaccinated because his parents Ethan Lindenberger, because his parents believe in anti-vaccine theories. So we tried to tell these company managers that you need to get your act together. Like, you're breaking down nations and you're breaking down people, and this is organized crime. And their response was quite, pathetic. For example, so they basically said that, report this hate speech to, using our channels. We already tried, it doesn't work, so they need stricter legislation. I'm actually about this banning, WKU and Yandex. A couple of weeks ago, I heard a British journalist who was one of the journalists exposing the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And she even said that because Britain is in such a chaos at the moment, because of the Facebook meddling and interference, she even said that Facebook should be banned there.
Hey, Jessica.
Yeah, where? Sorry.
Up here.
Oh, hello. Hi.
Could you introduce, I should have said it with the first person, could you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, my name's Trey Fant, but I have a question. Knowing maybe some of the threats you receive, and then, once you got started on your investigation, some of the threats that you did receive, what kept you going, and what was your motivation as a journalism to keep going on with the investigation?
Yeah, I noticed first these Russian smear articles being spread about me, and I wasn't so surprised because, like I said, we know Russia. I have lived in Russia. I have seen much more horrible stuff there being done to Russian citizens and Russian journalists and opposition figures. They, for example, are murdered with impunity. So I I understood that, okay, it's now someone's job to put out such press statements to Russian fake media to smear me, but it's my job to, continue investigating the trolls. And yeah, our interests collide, but I will continue my job, and I will have security officials to deal with these basically criminals. And also I just knew that I have the mandate from the audience and the journalist ethical guidelines backing me up.
Why do you think that...
Sorry, where?
Over here.
Okay.
You're one journalist in a relatively small country. Why do you think the Russians went after you in particular so ferociously? And have there been other journalists that you know of who have had the same experience that you've had with these people?
One of the reasons was that it happened so unfortunately to the Russians that their employees happened to be seeing what's happening in Finland and how, because in Finland, Yle is a big media house and it has big reach, and it also operates in Russian language and in English language. So it's the gateway from Finland to international world, and it's also cited by international medias, and it's also considered the most trustworthy medias. So those are one of the reasons. It's so visible, it's so influential. Also, one of the reasons was that I also started discussions. I put at the end of my article that let's discuss this topic with the hashtag RussiaTroll. So I was really waking people up and showing them this new phenomenon. And I was giving resilience to the Finnish people. And that's why they quickly wanted to attack. And police found email chains of these harassers who work in a gang. They were emailing to each other that let's put this Jessikka stuff into Russian media. From there, it will come back to Finland. So this is their strategy. And then about did any other journalist become target? Yes, so many, but not so viciously. I made a book about journalists and diplomat and businessmen becoming targets by the Kremlin and the security services because they did something similar as I did. So those people are so many.
I know you speak of a lot of different, threats and harassment you deal with online. Have you had any, physical, for instance, any stalking or anything like that, kind of make you fear for, your life, as a person?
Yes, I'm all the time worried about my life because according to the Finnish police's estimation, I am facing the impulsive threat if I'm in the wrong place in the wrong time, which means basically that if I happen to be in the same street where these extremists or people who believe these extremist stories about me happen to be, then there might be threat of violence. Also, just before this trial, there was an actual threat, for example, from a convicted violent criminal who told publicly that she will come to the courthouse and attack me, and accidentally I fall off the stairs. So, but she was then taken to the custody of the police, and she's the next to be sued. Then, yeah, there's a big line of those, but yeah, basically I'm afraid all the time, but I am yelling really loudly and demanding for protection, and yeah, this is now how it is. Was there something else that I didn't yet answer? Did I answer?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
On the topic of physical safety, have you been back to Russia recently, and is that something you would do with how journalists have been treated there?
Yeah, I was advised not to go there. And also I'm kind of boycotting it too, so I don't want to go just to a country where they treat their own citizens so badly and where there is so much corruption. I have my own friends there, and I have history there, I have lived there, I have worked there, I love the place as such, but the regime is so horrible, I don't want to have anything to do with them. And also, I'm being told that I would be probably harassed in some means. For example, I would be framed as some kind of criminal. So it's not a good idea. I just checked this situation because I would want, my heart wants to go back there, but I'm told no.
After your experience with this investigation and all the harassment and everything you face, would you do another story like this or another investigation that is so controversial or dangerous for you?
Well, if I found that it's a phenomenon that is threatening basically the civilizations and democracies as we know them, threatening human rights and the core values of the Western world, as well as security situations of both smaller communities as well as whole nation states, I would definitely do it again. But if it was some smaller story that has no impact in no one's life, of course not. And about the word controversial, it's interesting because we don't have that word in Finnish language. It's also, I have to tell that one method of information warfare is molding and redefining concepts. So in information warfare, as a journalist, it's super, super important how you pick and choose words so that you can always stay on the factual side. Controversial, in my opinion, is very vague. I'm not really sure what does it even mean.
If you could go back and change any of, just how the events led up to where you are today in your story and your investigation, how would you go back and change anything you did, or would you just keep everything the same?
I would change at least. I would not worry or be so sad or be so paralyzed of fear for so long times. I would not let these threats influence me in a manner that, for example, I sometimes I feel hesitant to go in the public to talk about this because I know where it will lead me to. And I would probably ask for more support even more support from my professional workplace to monitor this stuff for me, because for too long I did it by myself. But as far as the journalistic content, I would do nothing otherwise.
I have a question. So I guess, what are the typical things that you would look for that you could actually see where this is happening, like the trolling? Is there telltale signs? I guess this last week, I missed it, but there was a lot of controversy because Ellen DeGeneres was sitting next to Bush. And I'm like, could that be generated by trolls? To create this spark that creates this controversy when really there was nothing there? Is this what they're doing now?
That too, yeah. The best place to start is to infiltrate in the social media sphere. It's good and helpful if you know Russian, but as the Mueller investigation shows, these groups are in plain English language. For example, one group was named Secure Borders, and it was just racist rants, and the group kept building and building, bigger and bigger. But yeah, that's precisely, these trolls want to create these scandals and maybe controversy is the right word here in this context. This is exactly what they want to do, and they want to question stuff that people with normal sense of anything wouldn't question. And yeah, they also aim. One of the things that they aim, their end goal is to, for example, get rid of people who counter their own political goals. So that's why they also aim at regime changes, because they want presidents and leaders who are beneficial for their own political goal. So they create scandals around people who are counterproductive in relation to their own political purpose. So whenever there are scandals, you can check where this might be coming from. But unfortunately, there are many journalists who smell the click, and they go with the scandal and start spinning it further and further. For example, this Jenna Abrams, please. You just do not take some troll accounts who you don't even know whether it's a real person, her tweets, and embed them in your New York Times story. What?
Hello.
Where?
My name's Jake. I got a question.
I'm sorry, where? Oh, there. Hey.
Right here.
Hi.
So I know you've said some of this is about the technology companies and governments and ways that they can stop this. But do you think some of the blame could also be placed on the general audience for just believing this so easily?
That's a really good question. I don't want to blame people who might not know what they are doing, who might not have the capacity, because they are not, they should, in my view, they should be protected. I come from a Nordic state in which we value state protection, and we think that it's a state's job to take care of us and to protect us from basically cyber warfare. So I think it's government's job to protect these people. So I would definitely not blame them. I would instead go to their communities and tell them what they are facing. That would be really responsible, and educate them. I told in the US Congress when they asked this July, what should be done about this? And I said, well, if you cannot have free high education, university education, then you might want to try these and these and these. We have in Finland free university, and that's one key, but that's not the only thing that the government should do. So I wouldn't blame individual persons unless they do it on purpose, unless they know that it's fake and they still spread it.
Maybe one more question? Anybody got something that you want to put out there?
Hi, my name's Meredith. So with the situations that you're putting yourself in, what is the goal of your reporting and the end goal that you see for what you're presenting?
The same that is in the Finnish journalists' ethical guidelines, to provide the audience societally important information.
Great final question. Amazing answer. At this point, I'd like Kim to come up, and Kim, you're going to present.
I know, but I'm going to.
You want to say first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't offer me a microphone and then try to take it away, Loop. Thank you all for being here tonight. I, for one, am so glad that I'm here, that I've heard all that Jessikka had to share with us. When it first became apparent back in 2016 that Russians had hacked our elections and maybe had some significant impact on the outcome, I was flabbergasted and terrified. And then, as the years went by and we're getting closer and closer to the next presidential election, and it appears that our government has made really no efforts to prevent it from happening again, all I can say in response to that is, thank God for the journalists, for the people who are willing to do what Jessikka does, to put themselves on the line to make sure that somebody is digging and finding out what's going on and sharing that information with us so that we can be more informed about the forces that are working on our society. It feels so different and so foreign to how I'm speaking globally here. I'm assuming most of everybody in the room has the same sort of frame, but it feels so foreign to how we've grown up thinking about how our country operates, right? So anyway, when John and I looked at all of the very deserving finalists for this award, what we saw in Jessikka's work, it was a no-brainer to me, because this work is so important in helping us as citizens to maintain our democracies in Finland, in America, and in other Western countries around the globe. So, Jessikka, for the gumption you have shown in the digging you've done and standing in front of that camera day in and day out and reporting what you've learned to people and continuing to shout, as you said, when you see what's happening, for your work in sharing your experiences with other journalists and helping them to join this sort of campaign to find the truth. And frankly, for inspiring all of us, journalists and non-journalists alike, all of us who are citizens of this world, to remember our responsibility to hold up our democracies, to do our part, to do our shouting as well, to make sure it's not lost. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are so proud to recognize your efforts with this award for courageous journalism. So well deserved.
Thank you.
Very good.